Everyone. Today's topic is To Love is to Know Me. And it is the last in a long series on the Bhagavad Gita. So we're at chapter 18, the very, very tail end of the Gita, about 62 talks altogether over a span of several years. So this is the yoga of renunciation. To help us better understand how to attain renunciation and non-attachment, Sri Krishna shows how the three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, operate in all our endeavors. He explains how renunciation itself is of three kinds, but only renunciation of the ego itself is genuine renunciation of the sattvic quality. Krishna also explains that work is a means to realization by first renouncing the fruits of our actions. Second, renouncing the sense that I am the doer of my action. And third, striving to experience the personal God, Ishvara, alone is the author of all actions. Well, that's a pretty tall order. Well, we start by trying to renounce the fruits of our actions. In verse 21, we learn that there are three kinds of knowledge one may have and strive for. We can be satisfied with a deluded view of the world, and that is tamasic knowledge, or desire to experience a variety of everything we see, and that is rajasic knowledge, or to experience one's own self, one's true self in all, and that is sattvic knowledge. Swami Pravrajika in his Gita commentary described the sattvic experience. He said, when such aspirants are illumined, this world of multiplicity disappears for them in the realization of oneness. After returning to normal consciousness, they see this world of multiplicity, but also the unity, the underlying unity in the diversity, the one in the many, and that is sattvic knowledge. We saw in verses 23 to 25 how the three gunas manifest in our approach to any work we do. We're motivated by sattva when we feel our work is sacred. This can be any work, from sweeping to cooking to praying. All of our work is of a sacred quality, and we're able to perform it without attachment. We're caught by rajas when our work is ego-driven, with a desire for gain by sometimes dishonest means. And we're deluded by tamas when our work is undertaken in a mindless, thoughtless, or lazy way. So we, as spiritual aspirants, find the knowledge of the three gunas provides us with an invaluable perspective and guidelines so we can carefully choose how to move through life. For example, a real karma yogi is inspired by sattva. Those who have been inspired by sattva have attained a certain level of realization. They've experienced that God alone is the doer. They've had that experience. It's not simply lip service. It's an actual, genuine spiritual experience of a very tall order. Sri Ramakrishna described what sadhana one must undergo to become a real instrument of the Lord. He said, rely on him. Be like the dry leaf at the mercy of the wind. very descriptive. There are three different gunas that also give us three different types of conscience. Sattvic individuals understand that any job, duty, or desire that causes us to deviate from our spiritual path is harmful. But when the conscience cannot distinguish between truly what is right and wrong, and we're confused about right and wrong, then rajas predominates within us. A rajasic person can turn out an enormous amount of work, but often desires personal gain. A yogi can turn out an enormous amount of work without any thought for gain. But when the conscience is so diluted that it mistakes wrong for right and uses everything in a distorted way, then it has the nature of tamas. The three gunas are manifest in three different levels of discrimination we may have. In other words, these gunas are operating within all of our faculties, not just our actions, but in all our faculties of the mind, and discrimination is one of the highest. When we begin to evolve towards a spirit of selflessness, we understand that any job or desire that causes us to deviate from our spiritual path is harmful. And so that is sattvic discrimination. But when our conscience gives a distorted view of what is dharma and what is adharma due to the sway of our desires, as Arjuna's mind was at the beginning of the Gita, when he looked across the field and saw friends and foes alike, but also relatives in the opposing force, and he fell to his feet. He didn't know what action to take. That's when rajas predominates. And tamas prevails when the mind becomes so confused, it cannot distinguish between right and wrong. So the gunas also underlie our faculties of determination and willpower. The willpower of a sattvic person never wavers. A man or a woman of God is when pointed, doesn't back down even in the face of strong opposition when one knows one is taking a righteous point of view. On the other hand, a rajasic person's will is directed towards dharma, but also towards desire and wealth. A tamasic person's individual will is mere obstinacy. So we have to discriminate between the sattvic will that never wavers and the obstinate will without any desire to shake off laziness, fear, grief, or vanity, just taking a stand for the sake of taking a stand. So the gunas are also prevalent in the kinds of happiness we wish to experience. When one attains union of Brahman, even the sattva guna is transcended. So we transcend all of the gunas. The gunas, remember, are part of Prakriti. But before that experience, when one day we become absorbed in meditation upon the Atman, we will feel a sweetness, a joy, the joy of sattva. There's a sweetness that emanates a man or a woman of God when they're in that state. Swami Brahmananda said, to live in God is pure joy. When once you taste the joy of the Lord, he said, all other pleasures seem insipid. So that joy is coming from the heart. And it just emanates outwards. Rajasic happiness is lived through the senses. So what is the way? After all, both Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda had many saintly lay devotees. It's not just one path to the highest. So long as you are on the train is moving. whether we are householders, whether we're monastics, or we're just beginners. Tamasic forms of happiness are enjoyed only by the brutes of the world. And we can see this, we can read this in the newspaper every day. Then in verses 40 to 47, Sri Krishna explains how the gunas operate in the caste system. There are 3 gunas that are also manifest in different classes of people: the Brahmin, the Kshatriya, the Vaishya, the Sudra. Each caste possesses a collective psychological makeup. And we can ask ourselves, what caste do I belong to? Shankara explained. So each caste has a predominant guna. The Brahmin's nature is primarily sattvic. This is ideally speaking. His or her duty is to embody divinity. The Kshatriyas is largely sattvic with some rajas and holds on to duty to embody dharma. And a Vaishya is predominantly rajasic with some tamas. His or her duty is to serve society through various occupations and trades. And the Sudras is mostly tamasic with underlying rajas, holding duty to serve all people in society. Swami Pravrajika commented, in terms of society, the original caste system was based on the ideal that power should be shared and not concentrated in any one group. So each caste had its particular domain and duty. Religion and learning fell to the Brahmins, governance and military might to the Kshatriyas, finance and trade to the Vaishyas, and other essential labor to the Sudras. In the Gita, Sri Krishna points out that each caste's duties and corresponding teachings that will best direct aspirants from each caste to their goal. Ideally, a Brahmin is a rishi, though few have attained that spiritual height. Okay, this is idealistically speaking. However, Indian society safeguards this need for such a class of people who can devote their lives to the attainment of God realization. Swami Vivekananda made clear that all his disciples in the West were Brahmins. Now, how so? He stated the Brahmin caste and the Brahmanya qualities are 2 distinct things. He was revolutionary. He broke through caste. And in fact, the Ramakrishna order was the first order in India to break through caste. In India, he said, one is held to be a Brahmin by one's caste. But in the West, one should be known as such by one's Brahmanya qualities. As there are 3 gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, so there are gunas which show a man to be a Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Sudra. He went on, but at times, one or other of these qualities predominates in him in varying degrees, and it is manifested accordingly. He said, take a man in his different pursuits, for example. When he is engaged in serving another for pay, this is Sudrahood. When he is busy transacting some piece of business for profit on his own account, he is a Vaishya. When he fights to right wrongs, then the qualities of a Kshatriya come out in him. And when he meditates on God or passes his time in conversation about him, then he is a Brahmin. Naturally, it is quite possible for one to be changed from one caste into another. Now, it's interesting, one of the most interesting teachings Sri Ramakrishna gave was to Yogananda. And Yogananda was very soft-hearted. He was a Brahmin, no doubt. But Ramakrishna gave him the duty to go and buy a pan for cooking. And Yogananda did. but he trusted the merchant. And when he brought the pan back to the master, it had a crack in it. And Sri Ramakrishna said, "What's wrong with you? You know, just because you're a sadhu, that doesn't make you a fool. You look over every piece of merchandise. In other words, you become like a Vaishya at that time. You take on the duty of the Vaishya when that is the work you are doing and bring out the best in that action." And so that is especially for us in the monasteries and convents, that is a very important quality to have. In verse 47, Sri Krishna makes clear that all people, no matter what their caste, are born for perfection. It's a beautiful philosophical ideal. There is no eternal damnation in Vedanta. It may take you many, many lives, but you are on the train. And again, the train is moving. And we learn by our mistakes, and we are reborn to work out our karmas. But this spiritual life is an upward process. And so that's a very wonderful, wonderful truth. No matter what our duty, if we strive to perform our work as worship, we'll begin to feel we are not the doer and will advance spiritually. Swami Prabhupada points out the outcome in his Gita commentary. At the same time, we will feel there is a power within us, he said, and that it is that power that prompts our action. In truth, that is God's power, present everywhere. He went on, gradually we feel that the act itself, the process, is God. That is the ideal we must strive to keep before us. With practice, we attain perfection. This karma yoga is a wonderful, wonderful practice we can take with us wherever we are. Now I come to verse 48. Sri Krishna speaks to us. A man's own natural duty, even if it seems imperfectly done, is better than work not naturally his own, even if this is well performed. When a man acts according to the law of his nature, he cannot be sinning. Therefore, no one should give up his natural work, even though he does it imperfectly, for all action is involved in imperfection, like fire and smoke. So here, it's important to choose. It's as important to choose what we do as how we do it. What we do and how we do it. If we perform work that is another's duty, we'll fail. For example, if a monastic goes to war, he or she will have failed in their duty. There's a beautiful story that Father Thomas Keating told us at the Snowmass conferences near Aspen. He faced this dilemma when he was just out of Yale, whether to join the monastery or to join the draft. World War II was going on. And he asked himself some very, very deep questions. Here's a holy man. You know, he was in his 80s by the time I met him. He asked himself, could I kill someone if I had to? Yes, I think I could. And his housekeepers saw what he was going through. And she told him to go to a particular Monsignor. Go and talk to him, she said. The Monsignor suggested that Keating enter divinity school. He would then be exempt from the draft and could join the monastery later. But Thomas Keating said, is that right? I want to join the monastery, not divinity school. to escape the draft. Then the Monsignor said something very powerful in just a few words. He said, "This war is not for you." And his words rang true to Keating. Years later, Thomas Keating was in Rome to work out the details of the Pope's Vatican II. And this was another kind of war that was going on, where 60 to 70% of all Christians were leaving their congregations and their parishes. It was called the Great Church Exodus. And it was at that time that America was turning to the east. This was in the 60s. America was turning to the east. Buddhism, Hinduism, Sikhism, Sufism. And as Keating walked through the Anzio graveyard, he noted on the gravestones the American soldiers who had fought and died. They were all his age. But suddenly he felt a joy, as though their spirits were like a heavenly host surrounding him, and everything fell into perspective. There are two types of courage, depending on one's duty. One is the courage to face the cannon, and the other is the courage of conviction. And each brings a dharmic result, no matter what the outcome. In verse 49, Sri Krishna speaks to us. When a man has achieved non-attachment, self-mastery, and freedom from desire through renunciation, he reaches union with Brahman, which is beyond all action. So actions, again, are the property of the gunas, of the three gunas. But we can transcend their good or bad effects when we surrender the results of our actions to our chosen ideal. It's really very simple. If we can't do it at the time of our action, we can do it at the very end of the day when we sit before our shrine. Just mentally tie up the actions with a bow and offer at the feet of the Lord. Or we can try to perform them knowing we are not the doer. It's very difficult, but to bring into our consciousness that feeling that there is another power within us. Then, as Swami Prabhupada states in his commentary, we receive instead the infinite result, devotion that culminates in union with God. So karma yoga is not a path to the other yogas. It leads to the highest. Verse 50, Sri Krishna speaks to us. Learn from me now, O son of Kunti. He's talking to Arjuna. How man made perfect is one with Brahman, the goal of wisdom. How man made perfect is one with Brahman, the goal of wisdom. The following verses contain the essence of the Gita's teachings and describe the systematic stages of self-mastery that culminate in knowledge of God. Sri Ramakrishna described the stages of spiritual progress with this illustration. He said, the state of a servant's house will tell you unmistakably whether his master has decided to visit. First, the rubbish and jungle around the house are cleaned up. Second, the soot and dirt are removed from the rooms. Third, the courtyard, floors, and other places are swept clean. Finally, the master himself sends various things to his house, such as a carpet, a hubble for smoking, and the like. When you see these things arriving, you conclude that the master will very soon come. Pravrajika explained, in other words, before one receives God vision, the Lord sends the aspirant all the requisite spiritual virtues. And these unfold naturally in our life, day to day, as we progress. Verse 51, Sri Krishna speaks, when the mind and the heart are freed from delusion, united with Brahman, when steady will has subdued the senses, when sight and taste and sound are abandoned without regretting, without aversion. Freed from delusion means an intellect or a buddhi, the higher mind, that is becoming purified by meditation on the self and a subsequent growing natural detachment from this world delusion. It comes naturally over a period of time. Then the mind becomes like a pure crystal, uncolored and undistorted by mental dross caused by everyday attachment and aversion. When we progress, we learn, as Vivekananda stated, not only to attach the mind to one thing exclusively, but also to detach it at a moment's notice and place it on something else. These two should be developed together to make it safe, meaning balanced. Concentration coupled with non-attachment is a spiritual power if the two are equally developed. And it's an interesting example of this took place back in April when Swami Sarvadevananda, Swami Abhagyanananda, and myself were invited to the big inauguration of the Trinity Retreat Center of the Houston Center. And the Swami had worked very hard on 90 acres, about an hour and a half north of the Houston Center, putting in roads, graveling the roads, starting to build a little hut. He wanted to have cabins on the property, brush clearing, all of this, and then building up the house, the house that came with the property. 3 times a week he would drive up and back. And then 3 days before the inauguration, he received a call from the General Secretary of the Order to be transferred to Retz, France. And in the twinkling of an eye, he went. He put down everything and went and gave his mind 100% to the Gretz ashram. What a wonderful example. And the devotees, I was stunned to see this, all of a sudden, the inauguration, somehow it didn't have the same meaning. And the Swami completely put down. And that happened throughout his spiritual life when he was asked to transfer to various places, to go to India to work on the complete works, to go to Ridgely Manor and give up Trabuco, to go to San Diego to work on building up that center. Wherever he was posted, he went. So these are wonderful signs of spiritual development. When sight and taste and sound are abandoned without regretting, without aversion. And Swami Prabhavananda often used to describe his pilgrimage to Bodri Narayan with Swami Atulananda, one of the great Advaitins in the Ramakrishna order. And they were with 100 other pilgrims. As they were approaching a bridge, they saw a snow-capped mountain with the sun's rays lighting its eternal snow. They all gasped at such beauty, but they didn't revel in the outer beauty of that vista alone. They collectively sat down, closed their eyes to meditate, because they all realized that outer beauty reminded them of the supreme source of all beauty, Ishvara or Brahman alone. It was an incredible experience. Now we come to verses 52 to 54. Sri Krishna speaks. When man seeks solitude, eats but little, curbing his speech, his mind, and his body, ever engaged in his meditation on Brahman, the truth, and full of dispassion. When he casts from him vanity, violence, pride, lust, anger, and all his possessions, totally free from the sense of ego and tranquil of heart, that man is ready for oneness with Brahman. And he who dwells united with Brahman, calm in mind, not grieving, not craving, regarding all men with equal acceptance, he loves me most dearly. So, solitude and silence allow us to have a clear observation of this surface mind that we live in. And when that is silenced, we develop a depth of vision, spiritual insight, awakening of the wisdom heart. Swami Chidbhavananda stated, the sadhu comes to learn that solitude is to the mind what diet is to the body. Swami Chiriyananda, direct disciple of Ramakrishna, who founded the Shanti Ashram in Northern California, 300 acres, beautiful, beautiful atmosphere still there. He said the American devotees coming up and living at the Shanti Ashram used to call it talking to the self. These were days of silence. It helped them much spiritually, and they used to acknowledge it. But it was a rule that none was to remain with himself for more than 3 days in solitude. Meaning, it takes spiritual practice and the accompanying spiritual maturity to properly undergo and hold such a vow of silence. We used to take a vow of silence in Santa Barbara. That was in the early days, in the 70s when I joined, and in the early 80s, every full moon. We didn't answer the phone, didn't perform any business, just maintained a vow of silence. And the property there is beautiful. It's on 50 acres, so it's easy to do. It's in the country. Swami Pravrajika explained the spirit of these verses. He said, first, we avoid becoming one-sided by developing all our spiritual faculties, such as discrimination, dispassion, introspection, contemplation, and devotion. Furthermore, these faculties aid one another. These faculties aid one another. The yogas of meditation or selfless action are not possible without some attraction or devotion to God. So also, if love is not combined with intellect and will, it may turn into blind emotionalism. And if the intellect is not assisted by love and interest in God, it becomes dry intellectualism. He continued, at first, we see how distracted and restless the mind is. But as we pass our days and nights in study and contemplation, trying to let no other thoughts intervene, we begin to live in the consciousness of God. That is why we should try to develop this practice of solitude. Calm in mind. As we become centered in ourself, this higher self, we behold all beings with reverence. When we feel the divine presence within ourselves, we experience that same divine presence everywhere and in all beings. What does that look like? Sri Ramakrishna used to say, I see all beings as so many glass houses and this light of the divine shining within. See? Swami Nikhilananda explained in his notes on the Gita that similarly, We regard pleasure and pain of others as if they were our own. We have tremendous compassion and feeling for others. Calmness is not passivity, nor does calmness come all at once. It comes after much sadhana. Vivekananda described what calmness of meditation is like. He said, a carriage with 4 horses may rush down a hill unrestrained, or the coachman may curb the horses. Which is the greater manifestation of power, to let them go or to hold them? And how much training it takes to successfully restrain them and bring them under control. The carriage brought to a complete standstill is the manifestation of the greatest activity, likened to real meditation, that is pure calmness of mind. In the beginning of spiritual life, our entire nervous system must be overhauled, because there are 2 currents that are flowing in each one of us, one towards God and the other towards the world. When we try again and again to rechannel that current toward the divine, the mind naturally rebels, until gradually we're able to single-mindedly direct our mental current upward. Then it is that we're able to concentrate, meditate, and become absorbed in the thought of God. And he who dwells united with Brahman loves me most dearly, Krishna said. Again, Swami Pravrajika beautifully explained in his Gita commentary, Shankara and Ramanuja defined love as a continuous remembrance or recollection of God. It's so beautiful. Just as when we love someone, that person's presence is with us. That person is on our mind and in our hearts. We take that person with us throughout the day. So also with God. Ramanuja pointed out that when we remember a person, that individual is not physically present, but when we remember God, it is the same as seeing God, because God is our innermost self, ever present. So whatever we think of him, he is present. Moreover, he already knows every thought in our heart and mind. He is that intimate. He is that intimately connected within us. That is why great teachers encourage us to practice constant recollectedness. Swami Brahmananda used to teach, remember God constantly. Remember him when you eat, when you sit, when you lie down. Remember him whatever you do. By such repeated practice, you will find that when you go to meditate, it will be easy to remember God and become absorbed in him. As your mind becomes absorbed in meditation, a fountain of joy will spring up within you. And that imagery of a fountain of joy is there in the Christian mystics as well. It's something that is felt. It's a felt experience. What is that joy? Ananda, which is the same as love. Again, Swami Pravrajika explained the secret of this path to union. As we draw nearer to God, he takes possession of us. Just as when approaching fire, we feel its heat, so by thinking of God, we begin to feel the heat of his unbounded love for us, and impurities of the mind are burnt to ashes. Only when we become overwhelmed with that divine love do we know the true nature of love. Our whole heart is attracted in a devotion that only grows in intensity God intoxication. That is the goal. Verses 55 to 56. Sri Krishna speaks to us. To love is to know me, my innermost nature, the truth that I am. Through this knowledge, he enters at once to my being. All that he does is offered before me in utter surrender. My grace is upon him. He finds the eternal, the place unchanging. To love is to know me. There are two important aspects of this beautiful statement. We may ask, how does love know God? Sri Ramakrishna explained to his disciples, now I see that I and the Mother Kali, have become one. Radha said to Krishna, please dwell in my heart. But when later on she became very eager for a vision of Krishna, so eager that her heart pined and panted for her beloved, he would not come out. So that divine presence held within our heart imbues us with knowledge of it. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, Jnana goes as far as the outer court, but bhakti can enter the inner court. The Jnani views God as chit, pure consciousness, while the bhakta adores God as ananda, pure love and bliss. But both knowledge and devotion are ultimately united in the experience of God as Satchit Ananda. Existence, knowledge, bliss. Prabhupada Swami explained, when intense love for God arises in the heart, that is the same as immortal bliss and infinite knowledge. For Ananda is the same as Chit, pure consciousness, which is the same as Sat, pure existence. Filled with Ananda, the mind is elevated and the spiritual eye of the aspirant is fully open. He or she then knows the Lord as both Saguna Brahman, God with form, and Nirguna Brahman, the formless reality. As Swami Chidbhavananda explained in his Gita commentary, the aspirant gives him or herself over entirely to the Lord, and the Lord accepts such a one as his own self. The knower of Brahman becomes Brahman. Sri Ramakrishna said, once Rama asked Hanuman, how do you look on me? And Hanuman replied, oh Rama, as long as I have the feeling of I see that thou art the whole, and I am a part. Thou art the master, and I am thy servant. But when, O Rama, I have the knowledge of truth, then I realize that thou art I, and I am thou. So this elevated state is where bhakti and jnana meet. Verses 57 to 60. Sri Krishna speaks to us. Mentally resign all your action to me. Regard me as your dearest loved one. Know me to be your only refuge. Be united always in heart and consciousness with me. United with me, you shall overcome all difficulties by my grace. But if your heart is full of conceit and you do not heed me, you are lost. If in your vanity you say, I will not fight, your resolve is vain. Your own nature will drive you to the act. For you yourself have created the karma that binds you. You are helpless in its power, and you will do that very thing which your ignorance seeks to avoid. So these verses refer to our dharma in life. When facing any dilemma in life, Sri Krishna instructs us, first, we must surrender our dilemma to the Lord. Only then we shall be able to overcome all difficulties. Let's take everything to the Lord. Then we must ask ourselves, what is my dharma? As Father Thomas Keating was forced to ask himself when deciding it at the brink of World War II. And third, we must not shirk our duty, however much we must sacrifice in doing so, for that is cowardice. As Sri Krishna taught Arjuna. Furthermore, our own karma has brought us to the position in our life, to this very position, where we must face the brute, but that will give us strength. We don't become strong by resisting exercise. We become strong by weight-bearing exercise. So also in spiritual life, the challenges that come our way, when we try to move through them, we build our inner strength. There is a telling incident in Vivekananda's life that illustrates this point. Once during his itinerant days, when he was in Varanasi, the Swami was walking through a narrow lane with a large water tank on one side and a high wall on the other, and suddenly he was surrounded by a troop of very large monkeys. And I've seen such monkeys, are terrifying, in Bhubaneswar on the mat roof. And they're not little monkeys like this, they're huge, human size and fierce. And they blocked his way, howling, shrieking, and clutching at his feet as he walked. And as they pressed closer, he began to run. But the faster he ran, the faster came the monkeys, and they began to bite at him. When it seemed impossible for him to escape, he heard the voice of an old sannyasi call out, "Face the brute." These words brought him to his senses. Face the brutes. He turned and boldly faced the monkeys. And as soon as he did so, they fell back and fled. And in a New York lecture years later, Vivekananda referred to this incident to illustrate an important lesson for all life. Face the terrible, he said. Face it boldly. Like the monkeys, the hardships of life fall back when we cease to flee before them. If we are ever to gain freedom, he went on, it must be by conquering nature, never by running away. Cowards never win victories. We have to fight fear and troubles and ignorance if we expect them to flee before us. Verses 61 to 64. Sri Krishna speaks to us. The Lord lives in the heart of every creature. He turns them round and round upon the wheel of his Maya. Take refuge utterly in him. By his grace, you will find supreme peace in the state which is beyond all change. Now I have taught you that wisdom which is the secret of secrets. Ponder it carefully, then act as you think best. These are the last words that I shall say to you, the deepest of all truths. I speak for your own good. You are the friend I chose and love. The Lord lives in the heart of every creature. How Sri Krishna and Arjuna appear on the battlefield corresponds to an illustration we find in the Katha Upanishad. Chapter 1, section 3, and verses 3 through 6. Know the self is the rider, and the body the chariot. The intellect is the charioteer, and the mind the senses, and the mind the reins. The senses say the wise are the horses. The roads they travel are the mazes of desire. The wise call the self the enjoyer when he is united with the body, the senses, and the mind. Here, Arjuna represents the individual self, or Jivatman. The chariot is analogous to the human body. So Swami Chidbhavananda explained, the chariot moved and the warrior waged war. The former was unconscious of its movements, while the latter, the warrior, was conscious of the part he played in the war. That hero who first felt that he was the author of his karma was later obliged to learn that all karma actually belonged to Ishvara. Shri Krishna drove the chariot, but he took no weapons and waged no war. In other words, while the presence of the Lord causes all work to take place systematically, he remains actionless. He, the Lord, who resides as witness in the hearts of all, does no work, but his presence propels us to do their work. And so in the universe, Maya Shakti assumes the power of action and compels all to work under its law, like puppets tethered to a revolving wheel. But we, in our ignorance, imagine that we are in control and initiate all our actions. So how to get out of this cycle? Hold on to the conviction that I am not the doer, but only an instrument in the hands of God. Sri Ramakrishna affirmed, I am the machine, thou art the operator. When we take refuge in God, we are surrendering our ego to the Supreme Self. It takes practice, but one day the vision will open up that you are like a ripe coconut, as it were. Ramakrishna described the experience. He said, then he realizes that body and soul are two separate things. It is very difficult to separate with a knife the kernel of a coconut from the shell before the milk inside is dried up. When the milk dries up, the kernel rattles inside the shell. At that time, it loosens itself from the shell. Then the fruit is called a dry coconut. He has become utterly free from the consciousness that he is the body. He does not feel happy or unhappy with the happiness or unhappiness of the body. He does not seek the comforts of the body. He roams about in the world as a Jivan Mukta when liberated in life. One teaching that I received from my teacher, Swami Pravrajika, when once he was asked, did Christ suffer on the cross? And Swami said, no, he was an avatar. He was the ripe coconut, see, who could completely detach. Now I have taught you that wisdom which is the secret of secrets. Here Sri Krishna instructs Arjuna as to the proper course to take, but then says, act as you think best. So the guru guides the aspirant to stand on his or her own feet. How? By encouraging him to exercise his own power of understanding. Inquire for himself into the nature of the self. Practice those principles of Yoga Vedanta only when convinced of their truth. That's right, only when we ourselves are convinced. Then he prepares Arjuna for the deepest of all truths. Just as Jesus shared with his disciples, ye have not chosen me, but I have chosen you, So also Krishna revealed to Arjuna, you are the friend I chose and love. It is only through the grace of God that we become chosen and enter spiritual life. So how do we obtain that grace? Swami Brahmananda explained, the breeze of grace is always blowing. Unfurl your sails. How? The answer is in verses 65 and 66, the conclusion of the Gita. Krishna says, give me your whole heart, love and adore me, worship me always, bow to me only, and you shall find me. This is my promise, who love you dearly. Lay down all duties, in me your refuge. Fear no longer, for I will save you from sin and from bondage. When we reach the stage where we have taken complete refuge in God, his divine presence will become manifest in and throughout our lives. Then we will know we will have attained perfection. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.